Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Digital Empathy Lounge brought to you by Anthralytics. Now, if you've not come across our podcast before, we explore what's the greatest and next thinking in experience management, but particularly what great experiences should look and feel like. Now, today, I'm in conversation with Hank Brigman, who's Senior Vice President and Practice Lead at Service Journey Strategies. Hi, Hank.
How you doing, Peter? Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on. So, Hank, before we get into some of the topics about things we've discussed in the past, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes and telling us about yourself and your work.
Happy to. And it's kind of an interesting journey how I came to lead Service Journey Strategies, which is a global CX consultancy focusing on helping organizations with their journey focused transformation. So I played a little professional golf on the mini tours years ago. And from there, I got into managing fine private clubs and kind of a tough environment on the customer experience side, because if you pay $50,000 for the right to pay $500 a month in dues, for the right to pay $10 for a burger, needless to say, your expectations and the experiences are pretty high. And it was kind of in that environment, Peter, that I started to really work on my kind of touch point philosophies and principles. From there, I co-founded Touchpoint Metrics, led that through to acquisition by private equity. I then started writing my book and doing a little speaking and some consulting. I then went in-house and led customer experience for a Fortune 100 company. Great in-house experience. So it was interesting from the consulting side to go in-house. When I left the in-house position, I finished my book. I've had the honor and privilege of giving keynotes to the audiences on 5 continents. My book was a customer experience, customer service, international bestseller. And I have been recruited to lead this extraordinary global CX consultancy.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Hank. Isn't it interesting the checkered journeys we all have by the time we get to this point in our career? Now, you mentioned your book, and I know that you author a lot of materials. I know you've done white papers and articles. And I just want to pick out a couple of things that from our conversations and reading that you've mentioned that I'd really like to explore a little bit more. So let's take the first of those then. So one of the things that you have said is that the typical silo of departmental organization model often conflicts with customer journeys that traverse horizontally across these silo departments or responsibilities. So what do you mean by that? This difference between the silo vertical organization and the horizontal customer journey.
So thank you, Peter. A great question. And I think this is a fundamental conflict that organizations need to address in order to optimize their results. Until we address this conflict, in my opinion, we can't optimize results because we have a structural conflict. We're in these vertical focused silos, and they're structured typically around a leader. So if we talk about departmental silos, we'll start there and understand that a silo can be departmental, it can be a team, it can be a responsibility, a silo can be an individual. But let's start with the perspective of a department. We have a leader, we have teams, we have a budget, we have tools, we have our own data, we have our own metrics. And so naturally, we focus on our tasks. All of those are geared around the things that we as a silo accomplish. The conflict lies in the fact that the customer journeys, and we're talking about service journeys here, and service journeys together, the primary service journeys together make up the end-to-end customer journey. So as a customer embarks on a service journey, oftentimes they're traversing through and across these siloed focuses. And this is where the friction comes in, where the conflict is between me or you as a customer trying to accomplish what you're trying to do, and the vertical focus of the organization and the individuals within that silo and what they're focused on, because they're focused on their tasks. What do I have to do in my silo? What metric do I need to improve? They aren't focused on what we as customers are trying to holistically accomplish as part of our journey. So let's take an example. So let's say you in your home need something repaired. Your cable, your dishwasher, your air conditioner, whatever it is. And let's think about the silos that are involved now in the company that you're dealing with. So marketing is going to provide information on maybe how you get and accomplish that repair. If there's an app, maybe you can schedule a repair on the app. Website, you're probably going to go to the website, look for information. You may call the call center and talk to them. You're going to have to pay for that. So there's billing. Now, but that's accounts payable. Then there's also the billing of getting that invoice to you via paper, if that comes that way. Or maybe there's an app on the repairman's tablet if you're going to pay that way. And then if you don't pay, there's collections. And so I've only named some of them, and I can't count how many silos I just named. But you as the customer, all you're trying to do is get your item repaired. Now, interestingly, though, that's not the purpose of your journey. The purpose is the benefit of what that repair does. So, yeah, you need your dishwasher repaired, but that's not what you want. You want not to have to wash dishes by hand. You want your air conditioner repaired, but that's not what you want. You want your house to be comfortable. And so there's a lot to kind of solving this conflict. And historically, we really haven't had a lot of solutions. And all we've gotten then are the complaints. And Peter, every time we conduct or I've been involved in a customer experience engagement, I've had employees tell me, and you can hear the frustration in their voice. Hank, if I could just get this department or this team or this individual to do this, it would be so much better for the customer, so much better for us. And so, let's talk about the impact of this conflict on customers, on employees, and on what we're trying to accomplish as organizations, perhaps our bottom line. So for customers, we feel the friction between the silos. So you, silo, aren't focusing on what I'm trying to accomplish, and it feels uncomfortable. I don't have the best experience. The employees now have to deal with customers who are frustrated, which is never a pleasant thing typically. And then also there's that frustration I just described. The employees have been telling their employer about these problems for years, and yet they don't feel listened to, and they're frustrated. So on the customer and the employee side, we have frustrations, we have lack of the best experiences, and that's going to impact churn on the customer side, churn on the employee side. And then from organizationally, this conflict inhibits or reduces efficiencies. And so if we're not efficient as an organization, our costs go up, our cost to serve goes up. And so on the cost side, it's negative. And if we can address these conflicts, then chances are we're going to improve conversions, which then typically leads to more money, more revenue. And so we can reduce churn, we can improve conversions. The upside of solving this conflict is not insignificant, and yet we've struggled around this structure and this conflict now for decades. And so I think there are some solutions and some ways of addressing this that have started to surface. And these are some of the things that we're focused on here at Service Journey Strategy. So there's a lot to the conflict, and great question, Peter, but I think there's some light at the end of the conflict tunnel.
Great. Thanks very much, Hank. I'm just going to reflect back a couple of things that you said of what I heard, perhaps more accurately. I think you're right. I mean, many organizations, we like silo and departmental structures. It makes us the activity, the work, easy to monitor and manage. And we've all seen those quotes, what gets measured gets managed. But as you said, the customer is interested in outcomes. And some of those outcomes aren't just functional, but that they have also wants. I want to feel more satisfied, happy, less afraid, whatever it might be. So there's some rational part of that, there's some emotional part of that, but it's the outcome the customer wants, and they're the end of a very long process. So we sometimes talk about value chains in businesses, and we manage the discrete steps, but the customer doesn't care where a failure comes from. They just care they haven't got their stuff in the way that they want it when they want it. So And I think a lot of businesses are struggling with that tension between verticalized measurement and management, which makes it easier to break a business up into small pieces that you can control. But the customer at the end of the day just wants to see the holistic end result as it appeals to them. Now, you did say that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I've also heard you talk about some of the opportunities created by an integrated service model. So I wonder if you could just tell us briefly what is an integrated service journey model, sorry, and what some of those benefits or opportunities are.
Yeah, happy to, Peter. So if we think about silos, we're not going to get rid of them. I mean, they are baked and ingrained in our corporate world, in our enterprise world, and even in our startup world. No matter how big our smaller organization is, those silos exist. As I mentioned before, it can be an individual. And so, with the inability to get rid of silos, then what are our options? And you made a great point there, Peter, in that what gets measured gets done. And right now, our measurements typically are within the silo and then on a macro kind of relationship basis around CSAT or net promoter score, et cetera. And so the solution at the end of the tunnel is a multi-step, obviously. This is a huge issue in a complex conflict. And so the problem or the solution isn't simple, but there's some relatively simple early steps. So I'll talk about 3 steps that you can go through to address the conflict. The first is to identify, rename, and then measure these primary service journeys. The second step is to then design your integrated service journey model and its roadmap. And then the third step is to implement that model and to continuously improve. So let's talk about those 3 steps. So identifying, renaming, and measuring service journeys. So what do we mean by that? So again, it's back to the primary service journeys. There's a lot we could go on for days and weeks and years trying to identify all the little service journeys. But most organizations have maybe between 5 and 10, maybe 12 primary service journeys. And think of it this way, your service journeys together make up the end-to-end journey. So we need to start by identifying those service journeys. Now, what do I mean by renaming? So right now, chances are in your organization, as you talk about what you guys do, you're talking about what you guys do, not what the customer is trying to accomplish. So we need to reframe and rename the service journeys from what we do to what the customer is trying to accomplish. So let me give you an example that really drives this point home. Working with a large insurance company, and they had a team that collected monthly premium payments. And so that team was called Payments because that's kind of what they focused on, those premium payments. Well, they wanted to go to a service journey model. And so there were some in-depth interviews, focus groups, et cetera, done with customers. And lo and behold, customers didn't think they were just making payments. That wasn't the purpose of them giving the insurance company money. The purpose of that transaction was to maintain their eligibility for the insurance. So that's what that was the purpose of that service journey. That payment service journey wasn't to just pay a bill. It was to maintain eligibility for that important insurance. So internally, change that name from the payments journey to the maintaining eligibility. The impact of that, Peter, was actually fascinating. That's all it was done. Change the name. And yet first call resolution related to that improved. Transactional net promoter score related to that improved. There are many people that believe changing the name of that service journey improved the cash flow for this multi-billion dollar company. So there's power in a name. And the reason those changes took place and moved needles was because it changed the way people thought and how people acted internally. So a simple name change. So we need to identify, rename, and then measure. Now we want to measure on the customer's purpose of their service journeys. So rather than the siloed metrics, which are typically around tasks that the silo is producing, or net promoter score, which is typically about the overall relationship. Now we're going to actually get measurements around what the customer is trying to accomplish based on their service journey, which isn't that kind of customer centric? If we have an organization now, we're calling what we do, not what we do, but what they're trying to accomplish, and we're going to measure what they're trying to accomplish. It's powerful, just the name change. This first stage alone can start to change culture and help the organization become more customer centric. So the second stage, so an integrated service journey model, now we're going to actually fully address that conflict. And so what we need to do is layer a structure, a model over our siloed structure. So now we've defined all of these service journeys, and perhaps we've mapped and blueprinted, but let's think about what we typically do when we map a journey in an organization. We get a team together, we're in a room for 4 or 5 days, we map, we develop a bunch of action items and plans and roadmaps, and then that team dissolved. Well, now they go back to their silos. Nobody still owns the map they made, that service journey that they mapped. So what we need to do is keep a structure, a team around a journey. And so we're going to layer a service journey model over our departmental structure. That means the service journey has an owner. The service journey has a team. The service journey has metrics. The service journey has accountability. And so, again, we haven't gotten rid of silos, but what we've done now is layer this service journey model over the silo. So now there is a focus in our organization on what the customer is trying to accomplish. Now, not everybody in the organization gets on these teams. So while everybody's in a silo, not everybody is going to be on a service journey team. So it's a small team, but all of a sudden now we have a focus on what the customer is trying to accomplish. So we have to build that structure, design that structure, and then we have to also layer in a couple of key components. Change management, a robust change management process, because this is going to involve quite a bit of change. And we all know there's typically a little resistance to change. And secondly, we need really strong governance around this. There'll be policy issues, a lot of decisions to be made, and there needs to be really strong governance structure. So we design all of it, each of the service journeys. We start to lay out the team, we start to lay out the roadmap. We put together our change management program and our governance structure. Third step now, implementation. And there's some things we really need to consider here. So we're not going to typically implement all of our service journey structures at one time. What we want to do is a rolling, and this is where the roadmap comes into place. And one of the lessons learned is you want to start with a group that's really bought in. And you'll find in your organization, should you be fortunate enough to go through this, because if you're unfortunate and don't do this, you're in a competitive disadvantage, one person's opinion. So as you go through this, you'll find that within your organization, some groups are more inclined to be positive and embrace this. And that's really where you want to start, no matter perhaps where it would be most beneficial overall to the organization or to the customer. Start with people that want to do this. And so you don't launch the structure over all your service journeys at once. You do a kind of a rolling program. And this is now where your governance and your change management get a chance to get their feet under them, get the roots in. We start to show successes, et cetera, et cetera. And now we can also start to measure that service journey, and we learn and we grow. And now we're into the continuous improvement as we continue to roll that out over all of the service journeys. So 3 steps: identify, rename, measure. Then we're going to design. Then we're going to implement. So back to our insurance company example. So we talked about they changed the name from payments to maintaining eligibility. Well, they went ahead and implemented an integrated service journey model. Now, before they did that, they were in the middle of Forrester's CX index in their category, languishing there for years. Peter, after implementing this integrated service journey model, this company didn't just improve, they rocketed to the #1 position in Forrester's CX index. Now, there are a lot of tangible and benefits that this company realized. That just gives an example over all of the power that the integrated service journey model can bring to an organization, and the overall power and impact of really addressing the conflict, because that's really the problem we're looking to address. Benefits for employees, benefits for customers, benefits for the bottom line. It's powerful. So yeah, that's the light at the end of the conflict tunnel, Peter. It's there, and it's getting brighter and brighter as really kind of emerging companies that are really seeing the importance of customer experience, seeing the challenge this conflict that this conflict creates in their organization, and for those constituents that we've talked about, really seeking opportunities and how to address this, and turning to journey models as a way to do so.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hank. And I think it reminds me of, I've seen a lot of organizations try and go through transformations, and they're optimizing their processes or their technologies, and they do it in silos. And if it's disconnected, you can have one part of the organization may radically improve, but they're not bringing the rest of the organization with them. So they do need this touchstone. And I think you're quite right. By thinking about the customer and then integrating the service journey around the customer, it is a way of bringing together these disparate silos. We're always going to like silos. We're always going to want to be able to allocate responsibilities and measure performance, but you can't do it in a way where say, well, you're responsible for this bit, but I'm going to measure you on something you have absolutely no control over. So you do need that integration. Now, finally, one of the things that all journeys are made up of touch points. And I've heard you talk about things like having a right touch point capability. So what I'd like to do is, if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell us a little bit about what you think that means, but particularly what do you think it means to a customer? And I'm going to add my area of interest into this as well, in that lots of companies are saying, well, we're now customer centric and we've got organizational empathy. Well, where does that fit into this integrated service journey model, if at all?
Well, yeah, right touch point. So, you know, if you're a little tired of hearing the word touch point, perhaps I deserve some of that blame, because I'm the person, and it's been years now, I'm the person that put the word touch point on Wikipedia. And my definition of touch point has evolved over the years, but the definition I use is all the physical, communication, human, and sensory interactions with, within, and about your organization. And it's interesting, my original definition, Peter, was physical, communication, and human. And then I walked into a movie theater, and I smelled the popcorn and had the Pavlovian response, started to drool. And I realized at that point in time that was a touch point. I also recently, not so recently, but added touch points about your organization. The interactions about your organization are also touch points as we think about external reviews, et cetera. So I've been, really interested in touch points and their impact and their importance for decades now. And right touch points really, the concept here is we finally have extraordinary capabilities to deliver what I call right touch points. And right touch points are touch points, communication touch points delivered to the right person at the right time, via the right channel, with the right message, creating the right experience. And the right time can be in real time. And this is where some of the amazing emerging technologies, Peter, are finally making right touch points a reality. So the way we get to right touch points really is kind of better integrating 5 activities. And we're going to talk a little bit more about silos, Peter. So the 5 activities, which are problematic because they are siloed. We have profile. Who are you, Mr. or Ms. Customer? Then we have preferences and consent. In what ways can we compliantly communicate with you? And in today's privacy regulated world, that is a huge issue. So profile, who are you? How can we compliantly communicate with you? And then analytics. So there are all these data lakes around our larger organizations with data about me and about you and about everybody that they deal with, but rarely is that data really well analyzed in a real-time need state basis. We're starting to see customer data platforms and other tools that start to aggregate this data and help in that effort. But that third activity is analytics, bringing the other data in, adding to profile and to preference. The fourth step is mapping. So if I know who you are, and I know how I can communicate with you, and I know what you've bought from us and where you might be on our website, the mapping part is key. And here's where some of the emerging technology is so powerful. Because today, through some of these emerging technologies, if you touch 2 or 3 sequential touch points, there's technology today that can look at all the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, of millions of times customers have touched sequentially those 2 or 3 touch points and have a pretty good idea with a high degree of probability of the service journey you're on. And so mapping becomes key to understand the potential service journey you're on. So I know you, I know how I can communicate with you, I know what you've bought from us or where you might be on our website at this moment, second in time. And now, based on the sequence of touch points you've done, I have a real good idea of the service journey you're on. Now becomes the powerful ability to orchestrate right touch points in real time. With that information and the tools at our disposal today, we can instantaneously help you on the service journey you appear to be on, and do so from an individualized perspective. You know, Peter, I kind of have some frustrations at times with terms we use. And there's a lot of talk these days about personalization. And here's where some of the empathy comes in, to me at least, Peter, because if I get an email that says, "Hi, Hank," it's personalized. But chances are that email is to Hank the segment or Hank in the persona, and not to Hank the individual. So if the email says, "Hi, Hank," but starts talking to me about something that doesn't really relate to me, there's a disconnect. And to me, a lack of that organization having empathy and understanding me. And we now, as consumers, at times when we do get communications that are orchestrated based on real-time information, it's powerful in terms of how it makes us feel. And also then to the business's efforts, what it makes us do that typically is positive from their perspective. And so the process here is to not just personalize, but to individualize, and to do so with right touch points. Again, right person, right time, right message, right channel, right experience. And the goal here is to understand these service journeys and what I, as Hank, the individual, is trying to accomplish. And then the opportunity in real time is to communicate with me in real time in a way that helps me along my journey. And there's 2 ways these orchestrated touch points can be beneficial to me and potentially to the organization. One, it can help me towards the goal of the service journey I'm on. The other is sometimes it can be a service to me that you offer me something that may be relevant or something that's a need state for me. And so there's an opportunity to, I hate to use the word sell, but it's really more service from my perspective. Because if you're doing it to me as an individual and you understand the data that comes out of these 4 prior activities, now you can actually extend offers to me that may be relevant to me, as opposed to just trying to sell to me, that may be servicing for me and show to me that you know me and are empathetic for maybe some needs I have. And so the opportunity here is for me as a consumer to feel like you hear me, you know me, you're not being creepy, but you're helping me accomplish my purpose. And then the benefit as well for me is that now I'm going to be more efficient. You're going to help me be more efficient in accomplishing my goal. The benefit to you, the organization, is huge, because let's think about conversions for a second. You know, organizations focus on these big conversions, the conversions that mean revenue. It's the conversion to sell, it's the conversion to renew, et cetera, et cetera. But the key is, how many touch points do your prospects encounter before they buy? Because every touch point they encounter, they need to convert to the next touch point to get to that big conversion where they give you money. And so the beauty of right touch points is it from an organizational standpoint, and actually from a customer efficiency standpoint is it helps smooth the touch point to touch point conversions that get me, the customer, where I want to go, accomplishing my purpose, and gets you, the organization, to where you want me to go to convert where it can mean money or benefits to you, the organization. Because if we don't convert touch point to touch point, then we churn out of the journey, which is bad for me, bad for you, the organization. And so the right touch points and the capabilities today, the emerging capabilities and the emerging technologies are really powerful. But as there can be, Peter, there are challenges here. You know, we looked at some of the rating reports around the various platforms across those 5 activities I mentioned. And these aren't all the potential platforms, but of the rating reports we looked at, there were 574 platforms rated across those 5 platforms. So think of it this way. You have 574 salespeople trying to sell you a piece of what those 5 activities do. Because at this point in time, there's no one platform that really serves all 5 of those activities. And so it's really challenging out there to get those 5 activities to work together. 1, because there isn't a single solution. 2, because they're in silos. But the power of getting those 5 activities to work together and be in a position to deliver right touch points is huge. And so as we think about customers, as we think about improving the efficacy of service journeys, as we think of the integrated service journey model, all of this kind of works together. So if we can identify and rename and measure the service journeys, if we can get these 5 activities to work together so that as we work with our customers on their service journeys, we have the ability to communicate with them in real time with right touch points, and we layer this integrated service journey model over our current siloed structure, it's incredible what we can accomplish. And the name of the white paper, my most recent white paper, Peter, is How to Win the Journey Economy. And in my opinion, we are as organizations in a journey economy, because there was a big talk about the experience economy a while ago, but an experience is part of a journey. I talk about a hierarchy of customer experience terms. And Peter, we have a challenge with nomenclature around customer experience because, in most meetings in an organization, the majority of the people in the room have a business degree of some type. And if you have a business degree, you had an accounting class, you had a marketing class, you had a management class, you had classes where you learned the nomenclature and language of those disciplines. Well, nobody had a customer experience class because there isn't a degree. In my knowledge right now, there isn't a customer experience degree. And so the nomenclature around customer experience hasn't been as clearly defined as it needs to be to help us inside organizations really talk about customer experience. If we mention the word touch point or experience or journey, does everybody in the room have the same understanding of the definition of what that individual is talking about when they mention the word touch point? So to me, there's a hierarchy. We have the end-to-end customer journey, which is made up of service journeys, which are made up of experiences, which are made up of touch points. So each of those is a subset of the other. And if we have an understanding of the nomenclature around customer experience, then it helps us all communicate and it helps us all be on the same page. But back then to my point, to me, the experience economy is really talking about a piece of a service journey. And if we focus on the piece, we're not focusing on the whole. We need to be good at the pieces. We need to talk and understand touch points and the touch point conversions, but we need to do so through the framework and the perspective of the service journey as a whole. And so I think we're in a journey economy. We're in a journey economy, and that's what we need to help our customers do. We're in a journey economy, and that we need to help structure our organizations around that, just layering a journey structure or journey model over our departmental structure. And we're in a journey economy because those that do well with customer service journeys are going to win. And those that don't aren't going to fare as well, in my opinion. So the right touch points are important from the empathy standpoint I look forward to your comments and your further detail into that, because that's your area of expertise, certainly not mine. But I think it really helps us as customers to be communicated with as an individual, as opposed to personalized. Again, hi Hank doesn't make it relevant to me. It just is using my name to get my attention. So, right touch points, huge for the customer, huge for the organization, and I think key to being empathetic, for the organization to be empathetic with the customer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Hank. And you're right. A lot of those terms are used interchangeably. And I think we can all do more. But I think where you are coming from, which is, let's think about it from the customer outcome. What is it the customer is trying to achieve? Some of that is obviously practical. If my dishwasher isn't working, then I need to get it fixed. But why? As you say, because I don't want to be doing all the washing up by hand. And I think that interactions are clearly important. People do optimize them. And in my own research, interactions and an experience based around an interaction clearly can subtly influence how customers perceive you. But I'm not one of these people that subscribe to the adage, 70% of customers will abandon your brand on the first negative interaction. I think that's way overly simplistic for this. But I think when you start to think about journeys, for me, an important part of that is when the customer feels that they're listened to, that they're understood, and that their needs are understood, possibly even anticipated, and then delivered upon in a way that for them feels human, reflects the fact that they are a whole person, then that reflects the way they tend to think about brands as whole entities. And until we look at customers as whole people, complex, that have sometimes even conflicting needs, it's very difficult to do anything more than tinker around the edges with our own stuff. And of course, one of the challenges of that is pretty much most organizations today are pretty good at doing what they do from a functional point of view. Yes, of course, there's always a bit of room for improvement, but if you're a bad bank, you're on the front pages of the financial papers. So most of them are pretty good at being a bank. So that isn't necessarily what differentiates them. So I love this idea about the integrated service journey and thinking about that by the context or the scope, if you will, of the customer. What is the customer trying to achieve? Not how necessarily we're going to measure it is incredibly important. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this episode. So firstly, Hank, thank you so much. Really interesting. I'm going to play this back several times so that I can pick out some of these key points. You've definitely given me a lot to think about, as I'm sure you have the people watching. But at this point, I'm just going to say again, thank you very much, Hank. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. And until the next time, take care and goodbye. Cheerio now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.